Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this edition of 30 on Thursdays, SusQtech's bi-weekly webinar series. Let's go ahead and jump in while people are continuing to join here, jump into a couple of slides, do some housekeeping. If this is your first time, 30 on Thursdays, as I mentioned, is a bi-weekly 30-minute webinar series where we talk about anything and everything having to do with SharePoint. Our next webinar is coming up on Thursday, April 4th, 2 weeks from today, and it'll be part one of a two-part series that we're going to do on security and risk management. So we're going to talk about in the first, in part one is just general security risk and information management, and part two we'll get into some of the SharePoint specifics around what you can do and tools you can use to better enable your system to be secure and minimize risk where at all possible. You can get the full schedule of our upcoming webinars at susqtech.com/webinars. Today's session is being recorded, as well as a number of all of our previous sessions have been recorded and are available out at susqtech.com/archive-webinars. During the session, as Kyle goes through his material today, please feel free to use the question window. I will be moderating as usual. I'm Steve Witt from SusQtech, and you can go ahead and use the chat or question window. We'll save all questions at the end just to make sure Kyle has enough time to get through his material, and then we'll answer as many questions as we can. Some other online classes we have coming up that you might be interested in that we do in a 3-hour format that's more of a formalized training. We have using jQuery in SharePoint 2010. This is a 3-hour web-based class with Mark Anderson. We also have Nintex Workflow, which is a 2-day online course for those of you using Nintex, and that's coming up April 24th and 25th. And you can get all this information at susqtech.com/online training. And we have a bunch of recordings of all of our previous sessions, so if any of these topics interest you, please go ahead and visit our website. So again, to jump into today's topic, the topic is SharePoint 2013, a designer's perspective. Our presenter today is Kyle Schaeffer. He's a senior UX designer and developer here at SusQtech. And as I mentioned before, I will be the moderator. I'm Steve Witt. I manage the training and product development group here at SusQtech. So without further ado, we will jump into today's session. I'm going to go ahead, Kyle, and give you control.
Great. Thanks, Steve. And welcome, everybody. Just to give a quick introduction about myself, my name is Kyle Schaeffer, and I'm a senior design consultant at SusQtech. So I've had a lot of experience doing, basically just doing branding and customizations in the SharePoint platform. And I've been fortunate enough to have access to SharePoint 2013. I've started to play around with it, and for the most part, I've been pretty impressed. And basically what we wanted to do today is sort of give everybody in the webinar a designer's perspective, if you will, of the new 2013 platform. I've read a lot of articles by people who are analyzing it from a business standpoint, from a technology standpoint, but also, user interface and user experience is a part of that, and certainly for me, because that's sort of my field, it's something that interests me more. So what we're going to look at today is the new product, sort of how it affects the user experience, what the interface looks like, and maybe look at a few of the strengths that are coming along with the new product, and maybe a couple of the weaknesses that you might want to watch out for as well if you or your organization is interested in moving to the new 2013 platform. So with that being said, basically the new features are centered around these 4 bullets that I have on the screen here. So you have obviously a new interface. It does look a little different. Still a lot of familiar things if you use SharePoint 2010 in the past, but overall it kind of takes on the look of the new Windows 8 Metro interface. If you've seen that, it's kind of got those sharp edges, a lot of flat colors. Overall, it's very simple. There's not as much to it when you compare it to a lot of the old interface elements. They've kind of simplified a lot of things. And being a big proponent of simplicity myself, I'm actually a big fan of that. Some people aren't so crazy about it. Obviously they're not going to please everybody. It's just sort of up to you how you feel about that. But in terms of customization, I think that element of it is going to make it easier to work with, just because there's less things on the screen, there's less things that you're going to have to tweak and get rid of, less things like borders and background colors and shading and font differences. All that stuff has kind of been minified and minimized a little bit. So personally, I find that refreshing. I think that'll be a good thing. And around all these new features, really the last bullet point here is the theme, I think, for the whole product from a design perspective is simplicity, elegance, and speed. I think that's what it's all about. And if you go back and you sort of look at the evolution of Windows and all of the Microsoft products, from Office to Windows to their online products as well, the evolution has really gone from sort of the era of Windows 98, when you kind of had the boxy look to everything. It was kind of sharp edges. Then you get into the Windows XP era, and they started rounding off edges and giving gradients and things like that, making things look shiny. And then now we're getting to the Windows 8 era, where Microsoft's direction is, okay, let's go back to that sharp edge. Let's go and do some flat colors and do some really simple looks and styles. And that's not only the theme of Windows, the new version of Windows, but it's also the theme of all of Microsoft's new products. So from the browser, their new websites, to their new online offerings in the cloud, to the new version of SharePoint, and to Windows, it's all kind of taken on that same very similar look and feel of the Metro interface. So with that, let's actually take a look at that. I'm just going to show you a screenshot very quickly here. This is essentially what the new SharePoint 2013 site looks like. And this is a little site. I'm actually going to pull it up in just a second. We can play around with it. But essentially, as you can see, again, it's kind of simple. There's not a lot to it. You have a few things in here that you might recognize if you've used an older version of SharePoint. You're going to notice that you have a couple links up here. These might look a little bit new. Newsfeed, you can link directly to your SkyDrive. This is sort of the optional stuff that comes in the interface by default. Obviously, you're going to get a menu where you can sign in and sort of manage your profile information, sign out if you need to. The Site Actions menu, Microsoft has decided to really fake everybody out, and in SharePoint 2007, the Site Actions menu was on the right by default, and then they moved it to the left in 2010, and now they're moving it back to the right in 2013. So I think they're trying to keep everybody on their toes, but you will see that the Site Actions, which is actually now just a little gear icon, is actually located on the right in this case, along with the help icon. They have a couple new things. I think one of the new features you're going to see that's really persistent throughout the entire 2013 platform is enterprise networking. So a lot of new social networking features. The new My Profile page, what was the old My Site, is actually really nice. They seem to have made a lot of improvements there. It looks much nicer. It seems to be easier to work with, and there's a lot of new functionality there as well. So those buttons that sort of appear in the ribbon when it's minimized seem to be a lot easier to work with, and you can sort of play around with that if you guys do get into the 2013 platform. That's usually the first thing that I see a lot of people doing, because it's kind of a very prominent place in the window. It says share and follow. Those are things that people are sort of used to doing on any website, not just in SharePoint, so it seems to be a very friendly place to go and sort of share information and follow information throughout any of your SharePoint 2013 sites. Obviously, you have a search box, nothing too crazy there. A lot of the same elements you're going to get in a SharePoint 2010 site, so if you're familiar with the product already, not a lot of huge differences here. You have things like the quick launch, the top nav, and then of course you have a big center area of the page where you're actually browsing around and looking at things. So all in all, the interface, again, it's simplified, but it's not a huge departure from what we did in SharePoint 2010. I will say that behind the scenes, things are quite different. But sort of in the presentation of everything, yes, you have a few new links and a little bit of a rearranging of elements in the screen, but again, from a designer perspective, not a lot of huge overarching changes to the way things work. So let me go back here and just a couple technical things, because this is something maybe not, if you're more of a designer, if you're going to work in Photoshop and think about the aesthetic of a SharePoint site, maybe this stuff is a little too technical for you. Maybe this isn't something you're interested in. But if you actually get in and have to do this interface development, have to make changes and customizations to the actual SharePoint site, this might be something of interest to you. So I'm going to try not to get too technical here. We'll just sort of go through this real quickly, but this is actually a pretty big change. The document type, or the standards mode that SharePoint 2013 runs in by default, is XHTML 1.0, which is actually the same. I believe that's the same it was in SharePoint 2010, but the new thing here is that HTML5 is a new doc type you can use, and that works just fine without any modifications or anything like that. So that's good news, because a lot of websites now are using HTML5. They're using all these new features that browsers can sort of leverage to make really, really interesting user experiences and really enhance the way your websites work. And perhaps more importantly, this second thing on the screen here, the second bullet, you may not recognize that. You may not understand what that is. It's this thing that if you were to go and view the source of a SharePoint site, you're going to see this tag in there that says meta HTTP equiv, and then all this junk, and then it says content equals IE equals 10. Now, in SharePoint 2010, this was actually a really big issue. Maybe not an issue, but just it was sort of a limitation of the platform. In SharePoint 2010, it had this same tag, but it said content equals IE equals 8. And what that does is in SharePoint 2010, it forces the Internet Explorer browsers, even if you have version 9 or version 10 of Internet Explorer, it forced them to display an IE8 compatibility mode. So basically, you're forcing your browser to go back a few years and lose all the new features that were implemented in the new versions of those browsers. So in SharePoint 2013, they've actually they've still left this tag in there, but what they're doing is they're locking it so that all the browsers are going to run into IE10 mode, which is essentially standards mode. I think they're just sort of future-proofing for themselves. But what this means is because we're no longer locked into that compatibility mode, we can now use the new features of HTML5, of CSS3, and all these standards compliant features that we weren't able to use in the previous version of SharePoint. And this is actually a really big deal, because there's a lot of things that you couldn't do in SharePoint 2010 without a lot of changes and a lot of work, just because it was running an IE8 compatibility mode. So this is actually a really good thing. We've had really good feedback on this. We're able to take advantage of a lot of new browser features, and this is one big thing that you're going to find is going to be a big improvement over the previous platform. Again, that's a little bit technical, getting into the HTML and stuff of this, but I do find that to be a pretty cool improvement over the previous version. So this stuff, we're going to stop talking about this, and let's actually just jump in and I'll show you a couple of these things. So this is my SharePoint 2013 site. So as you can see, just like the previous version of SharePoint, you have sort of a top nav with some drop-down menus that come down here. You have a quick launch or a left nav over on the left here that sort of shows you some contextual links based on where you are. And again, just like the old version of SharePoint, if you create a new publishing portal, you kind of get these links that say, okay, let me help you get started. So either you're the information architect, maybe you want to set up some permissions, things like that, visual designer, etc. And then as you sort of build out your site, you get these additional links that appear on your top nav. I can sort of click around here, and you'll see a lot of these other elements in the interface here. I've actually created this site called Examples, where I basically just have a bunch of examples of SharePoint content. And I've sort of built this stuff out just to sort of play around with it and see what the new version looks like. So as I click through this stuff, you guys don't have to look at every little thing I'm doing, but you will notice that overall the interface, again, is sort of clean, it's sort of simple. They sort of removed a lot of things to make it just very, very sort of sharp edges, flat colors, some very light sort of sans serif fonts that you'll see here. They're using a font called Sago UI in a lot of different places here. And overall, again, it's just a very sort of elegant experience. I guess my search center is not working, so we'll ignore that for now. And one of the new features I really like is they're really leveraging taxonomy and managed metadata a lot more. So if you're not familiar with that, in SharePoint 2013 they sort of introduced the tagging feature where you could tag a page or a document with certain keywords that you can actually define, or you can have sort of the folksonomy where people can tag whatever they want. But I sort of set up an example here in SharePoint 2013. A big thing that you're going to find that's going to help you sort of implement your designs is they have this new this new navigation that's actually based on your taxonomy. So what I did in this example is I created this site called Music, and I just have a bunch of pages that, just music pages that I set up. And so, for instance, you can click on one, and it just shows you some text and maybe an image. But what I did is I tagged these artists with different musical genres. And so what it is the navigation is actually automatically building itself based on how you're tagging your content. So if I go and I click on rock, it's going to show me all the pages that have been tagged with rock. And again, these aren't navigation links that I've set up myself. They're sort of automatically being built out in your left nav based on how your tags are set up. So if you go and you tag something with a tag that doesn't appear here, once it's indexed by the search service, it'll actually automatically populate inside of your navigation menu. So essentially what that boils down to is you have a new way to manage your navigation, and it seems a little more natural. You don't have to force all your content into these defined structures and buckets, and it's just a new way to allow your users to navigate, and that's really going to allow you to do some cool things. So that being said, that is sort of the new interface. I'm not going to dwell on that too much because I know we don't have a ton of time, but one thing I do want to point out from a designer's perspective, the way that you interact and customize the SharePoint 2013 platform is going to be quite different. They still have a lot of the old stuff. You can still connect to your site with SharePoint Designer. They have a new version of SharePoint Designer out. Honestly, it works pretty much the same as the old version, but they have this new thing called the Design Manager. And you'll see right on the home page of your SharePoint site, it's going to give you links like import a design package, configure image renditions, design your site. These are all new things in the 2013 platform. So it's important to understand a little bit about what those things are. So what I'm going to do first is I'm actually going to go to the site settings, and I'm going to go to this new option here called the Design Manager. And this is a completely new feature in SharePoint 2013, and it's actually pretty cool because what it does is it allows you to do a couple things. So first of all, the first thing I'm going to look at is this thing called Pick a Pre-installed Look. And I'll zoom in so you guys can see that. You'll see there it says Pick a Pre-installed Look. This is sort of replacing the themes that you might have seen in previous versions of SharePoint. And it's actually a lot better than themes. You'll see if I go to this pre-installed look thing, it kind of gives you theme previews here. So you can see this is very similar to what themes were like in the old version, but let's just say I want to pick this one right here. It's called Sea Monster. You're going to click on it, and what it does is it actually gives you a live preview of a SharePoint site. And rather than forcing you to just pick that theme and sort of being restricted to colors, you can do things like add a background image. You can pick a theme here, so I can pick from a different color set. Let's pick a really ugly one so it's very obvious that I changed it. You can even change the layout from here. So you can see you can actually create different layouts. They have one called Seattle and one called Oslo. So you can sort of change your layout and your fonts all from here. Again, sort of similar to what they had before, but the ability to add background images, and you can even create your own theme colors here. If you upload an XML file sort of on the back end, you're going to find this is a lot more flexible, and you might have situations where maybe you don't need to go and build a new custom master page because the new composed looks seem to be much more powerful than they were in the previous version. And then what you can actually do is you can hit this button that says try it out, and I actually have an error because I guess my site isn't working right now. Yeah, I guess that's not going to work. I started to get an error when I was playing around with this today, and I don't know why. So, but if your server is set up, you will see that once you go to try this out, you'll get a little preview of the theme that you picked, and then you'll actually be able to play around with that and sort of change your colors and things like that. So that's the composed looks, or pre-installed look, composed look. Another thing you can do with the Design Manager is, this is a new thing. You can actually go and there's this option to upload design files. So again, this is completely new. This is a really new thing. What Microsoft is really trying to do is they're trying to make designing a SharePoint site more accessible. So rather than having to learn all about master pages and all about the ASP controls and all that stuff that goes into a master page, what they do is in the design manager it says map the following location as a network drive, and you can easily access your design file. So you see it gives you a little address here, and I've actually already done this on my computer. And what it is you get this network drive, and when you open it up, you actually get a list of your master page files right on your computer. And what this allows you to do is that you can sort of, it makes it so you don't have to open up your master page in SharePoint Designer. You can actually open up your master pages and edit them using any HTML editor. So again, they're trying to make it more accessible. They're trying to make it so you're not forced into using the Microsoft tools. So you'll see here I actually have Dreamweaver open here, and I've opened our network drive, and I'll just show you as an example here. I'll go down to our master page called Seattle, and it's actually just an HTML file. So again, you don't have to worry about your specific SharePoint stuff. It's just like editing any HTML file. And again, I'm not going to really get into this, but if you wanted to, you could just come down and actually just start making changes directly to this HTML. You can edit all this stuff in Dreamweaver and not have to use any of the Microsoft tools. And this is a really new way to interact with your SharePoint site. If you want to do things like tweak your navigation menus and things like that, you have to use a thing called the snippet editor, and there's all these new features with the design manager that allow you to do that. But again, it's about opening the door and letting in new applications and letting people with web design skill sets who maybe aren't familiar with SharePoint get in and start making their own designs. It even has a feature where you can actually upload an HTML file and it will convert it to a master page for you. So again, it's all about sort of evening the playing field and letting everybody get in and make SharePoint designs. And then finally, to make things even easier, they have this new feature called design packages, where when you're done and you've set up your design, you can actually go in and save it all out as a solution file, as a package. And so all you do is you give it a name. So you say, you know, Kyle's custom design, or, you know, my client's design, whatever you want to call it. You hit create, and it'll actually create a file, a WSP solution file, that you can then import into any other SharePoint site. So you're creating this little package that has your master page, all of your page layouts, all of your CSS and JavaScript. All that stuff is going to get saved into this little design package, and then you can distribute that into any other site as a theme. So it's really, really useful, and again, it's all about making things more accessible, making things shareable, and it ends up being a pretty powerful solution. I think it's a pretty cool thing we can do with the new design. So again, that's the design manager, that's compose looks, HTML master pages, all of that other good stuff I just showed you. Unfortunately, we don't have a ton of time, so that I can't really show you great examples of all this stuff, but again, it's definitely something to keep in mind. If you guys open up your SharePoint 2013 site, it's always the first thing to look at if you're a designer, is look at these new ways you can interact with your SharePoint site. The old ways are still there. You can still do all that stuff, but all the new ways, these new avenues are sort of opened up so that everybody can get in and play around with this stuff. And before I leave you, I just want to point out one other new thing. This is another new feature you're going to notice in the in SharePoint 2013. They do have a new mobile feature called device channels. And I did mention at the beginning that I would also point out some weaknesses of the SharePoint platform, and mobile is maybe one of the areas where I would say SharePoint 2010 isn't completely mobile friendly, and that is maybe one of the weaknesses. So device channels are this new feature where basically you can apply a different master page based on what device a person is visiting your website on. So you can say, if you're on an iPhone, here's your iPhone master page, or if you're on an Android mobile device, here's your Android tablet master page. The problem I have with that, it's great that we have a new feature, that's something we didn't have before, so that's good. But the problem I have with that is it requires the segregation and duplication of your design efforts. So basically you have to create a master page for desktop, then create one for all your other devices, then create one for tablets, then create one for whatever else. And that is not, in my opinion, the absolute best approach. It's neat that you can do that, and I can see how that would be really useful in a couple cases, But personally, I usually fall on the side of responsive design. And that's essentially where you're creating a single master page that's mobile friendly and it's flexible enough that it can appear on all those different devices without having to duplicate your design effort. And the good news is that in SharePoint 2010, because you no longer have that IE8 compatibility mode, this has become a lot easier. So the responsive design, you can still do that. I would say mobile is still going to be a little bit of a challenge in SharePoint and the new version, but certainly the ability to do it is there because of the new compatibility mode. And you will find that doing mobile sites is maybe a little bit easier than it was in SharePoint 2010 because Microsoft has actually removed a lot of things like tables and really those inflexible things that were really challenging in the previous versions of SharePoint. So again, it's still going to be a challenge, but the ability and the possibility, the technology is there to make mobile-friendly SharePoint sites. And if you guys want to read more about this, you want to get into customizing your own SharePoint 2013 websites, I will recommend two resources that have been really helpful for me as I'm sort of going through and looking at this. So first of all, Randy Driscoll has released the 2013 Starter Master Pages. So if you want to get started with sort of a blank slate, a blank template that'll help you implement your own design, that's a really good resource. You can find that along with his 2010 and 2007 starter templates at startermasterpages.codeplex.com. And also, this is a new thing from Eric Overfield, D'Ars Hess, and Gilda Spencer. This is a cool template. It's called Responsive SharePoint. I will say it's got a few bugs. You know, they're still tweaking it. It still has a little bit to go, but it's actually based on a HTML, CSS, JavaScript library called Bootstrap that's very popular outside of SharePoint. It's very popular in WordPress and Drupal and all those other sort of CMS platforms, and what they're trying to do is bring that sort of framework into SharePoint. And so that's a really interesting project, and I'm very excited about seeing what they're going to do with that because it does, again, bring that responsive element, that flexible element to SharePoint, which would be very cool. So check out those two projects on CodePlex if you want to start working with your own SharePoint 2013 sites. I think they're really good places to start if you want to jump in and start designing things yourself. So if you guys have questions and comments, we'll go to the questions now, and you can find my contact information along with Steve's up on the screen. And Steve, I will hand it back to you.
Okay, great. Actually, you can keep control because I think you might want to show a couple of things to the questions that we have here, Kyle. The first question is editing existing pages more straightforward than in 2010? So is editing pages easier in 2013?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll actually show you an example of editing a page here, and you'll actually get to see a little bit of the new ribbon and interface as I do this. So you can see when you go to a publishing page now, you get this very prominent edit button up here on the right, and as you start to edit a page, you'll see it's sort of the same deal as before. You have web part zones, you have all that stuff, but the ribbon and all that does seem to work a little bit smoother this time around, so I will say it seems to be a little bit easier. So if I switch to, let me switch to a page layout that we can type stuff into. Here we go. You'll see they've made a few improvements here that I really, really like. So overall, this process is going to be the same. There's not huge changes, but one thing I really like is they've taken the markup styles from the previous version of SharePoint 2010 and they made them a lot more prominent. So for instance, if you want to set up a heading, you'll see this is actually set up a lot more like it is in Microsoft Word, where you can set your markup styles directly from this panel right here that shows up, the styles panel. And again, this is really nice because you can actually, as a designer, you can add to this list. You can create your own text styles, your own markup styles, and have your users actually use those on your pages. So I really like this new styles menu. I think that's a big improvement over the previous version, over SharePoint 2010. Overall, everything seems to be a little bit simplified, but at the same time, you're going to see it's pretty much the same features that we had before. So other than that styles, I think everything's pretty much the same. You have all the same insert things, you know, inserting pictures is the same. All that stuff is pretty much works the exact same way that it did in SharePoint 2010.
Great. Next question, Kyle, is will import design package replace deploying Visual Studio features for branding?
Well, that's a great question. So the design package that I mentioned, so if we go to Design Manager, you'll see the first option here is import a complete design package, and basically you just browse to a file. So in SharePoint 2010, if you wanted to deploy a design package, you had to do this in Visual Studio and deploy it. I will say that this is essentially the exact same thing as creating a design package in Visual Studio. It's just easier. So they've kind of, it's not going to be a big difference if you want to make this easier. A lot of times I find that the people who implement design customizations maybe don't have a great Visual Studio skill set. Maybe they're not as comfortable in Visual Studio. Then by all means use a design package. It seems to be easier to use, but again, if you're in a really big production environment where maybe you have a production server, a development server, and you have all these other environments where you have to sync your design to, in that case the Visual Studio option is still there, and that might be a good solution in that case. So it kind of depends on the project, but I really do like the design package. I think it's very easy to use and certainly a viable option for most of your projects.
Okay, great. Next question is the Design Manager specific for publishing sites, or can you bring it up on a team site?
That's a great question. The Design Manager is, I don't believe it is specific to publishing sites. So you'll see here, this is a team site that we have here. And on the team site, they even have a little link here that says change the look of your site. And all that does is it goes to the Design Manager. It's just sort of a link that goes directly to the change the look. So that design, I don't know if it is different based on the version of SharePoint that you have. That's what I'm not sure about. But certainly on the enterprise version that we're using here, you know, the team sites and Design Manager, all of that stuff is still available. It should be no problem.
Okay, next question is, and I don't know if you have any experience with this, Kyle, is can you take a customized branded 2010 site and upgrade it to 2013 from a branding perspective?
Yes, there is an upgrade path. They do the same thing in SharePoint 2013 that they did in 2010. And I remember, I haven't done this myself yet, so I don't have experience with this, but I remember seeing somewhere there was visual upgrade or something like that. Yeah, I don't really have an example I could show you, but from what I've seen, I believe that you can drop a 2010 master page directly into SharePoint 2013 and everything should work just fine. They have the same thing that they had in 2010 where they have a thing called the I think it's called the Visual Upgrade Preview or something like that, where essentially all of your cool new features like share and follow and all these new elements of your interface, they're basically not going to work. Your 2010 master page is going to look just like a 2010 master page it looks like now. It's basically going to just show the same thing inside of SharePoint 2013. So if you do want to utilize a lot of these new features like the new search box, the new share and follow, and all this other good stuff, you will have to do a little bit of work behind the scenes to actually upgrade that.
Gotcha. All right, I have time for two more questions. One is, are the web parts table-based as the old versions of SharePoint?
That's a great question, and I'm very happy to say that web parts are no longer based in tables. And if you actually view the source on the landing page here and search for table, there are no results. So actually, in most cases, they have removed tables. It only took them about 10 years to do that, but finally they were able to do that, and I'm very excited about that. You will notice they still have tables lingering in a couple places like the blog. These two columns are still in tables for some reason, but honestly in a lot of cases, especially on publishing sites, the tables have been removed, which is really, really good.
Nice. And the last question we have time for today is, and what you looked at is the rich text editor that you showed previously, is it less buggy than it was in 2010?
Yeah, that's a good question. It does seem to be less buggy. I haven't used it a ton, and honestly, it's a lot of the same new features. But overall, the the page seems to like jump around a lot less. I think the scrolling elements in the previous version of SharePoint, it kind of had some bugs in it where you might go to select a style and then things jump around on the page. That seems to be fixed, which is really good, because that was a big issue in the previous version of SharePoint. And in terms of other types of bugs, I haven't noticed anything in the little bit of time that I have used this, but again, I do know that overall it just feels a little more solid, and the scrolling thing seemed to be the biggest bug that bothered me in the previous version of SharePoint, and I do know at the very least that one has been fixed. So that's certainly good news for everybody, especially Chrome users. This is going to work a lot better in Chrome than SharePoint 2013 did. Or sorry, SharePoint 2010 did.
Gotcha. I'm going to squeeze one more question in, Kyle, and then we'll call it a day. The question here is, I don't know if you've worked with this at all in 2013. InfoPath and browser-based forms with data connections, are they easier to use? Have you played around with InfoPath or even any of the forms, like the list item forms, etc.?
Well, that's a great question. I actually do not have much experience with InfoPath, so I can't speak to how that's being implemented in the 2013 version. I do know, however, that if you are used to building out list forms and list views using SharePoint Designer, that will no longer be available in SharePoint 2013. So that's actually a pretty big change. They've basically, in SharePoint Designer 2013, they have taken out the design view. So the only way you can interact with any of your list web parts and your list views in SharePoint Designer is now going to be using the code view. So you actually have to edit everything in code, which again, they've sort of opened up the avenue for you to use Dreamweaver and things like that. But if you built out any type of forms and things like that using SharePoint Designer, that's I guess you could still do it, but honestly, I don't see why anybody would want to sit there and type tons and tons of XSL into code view and then probably have it not work anyway when you refresh the browser window. So a lot of those features have actually been removed from SharePoint Designer 2013. Now again, I haven't used InfoPath, so maybe that's Microsoft's goal there, is to push people towards products like that when they're designing forms, and certainly I hope that that's going to work really well inside the new platform as well.
Great. All right, I think let's go ahead and I'm going to take control back here. Kyle, thanks for your time today. I appreciate it. I know it was a lot to cover when you look at all the new great things from a design perspective in 2013. I do want to talk about one other thing that I forgot to mention at the beginning. SharePointConference.org is coming up in June. It's here in the DC area, actually at the Gaylord in National Harbor. There's a coupon code up there if you're interested in registering, and I bring that up because Kyle is doing a designer workshop, a one-day designer workshop on the day preceding the conference on the Wednesday, and it's going to have a great mix of SharePoint 2010 and 2013 sessions. Kyle's going to be doing a bunch of sessions, and a number of other people are going to be doing sessions at the SharePointConference.org coming up in June. And with that, again, Kyle, I'd like to thank you again for your time today, and we'll see everybody again in 2 weeks when we start a two-part series on risk and security in SharePoint. Talk to you then.